We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Dalet Amud Beis in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 94b. On the previous summit, the Gemara brought a Mishnah Mesechet Shabbos. It says that if you have karim and kistos, you have cushions and blankets that are shel or, that are made out of hide, so then on Shabbos you're allowed to wash them with water, because or is generally not something which is really laundered. It's not bar kibus, and therefore it's permitted on Shabbos. And on the previous summit, the Gemara said that Mishnah Mesechet Shabbos, it follows the opinion of the Rabbanan. There's actually a machlokas between the Rabbanan and the Acherim. When it comes to or, when it comes to hide that is hard, there's a machlokas whether that's bar kibus or not. The Mishnah in Shabbos says it's lav bar kibus, and that follows the opinion of the Rabbanan. That's what the Gemara said in the previous Amud. And the Gemara now is in the middle of bringing a question from Rava. Rava asks on this interpretation of the Mishnah, karim v'kistos, and when it comes to cushions, when it comes to blankets, those are not hard, those are generally soft. Rashi says, karim v'kistos derachin inu dein oson osan ela meorach. A person makes them only, we only make them out of hide that is soft. Shehein noach lishachev olav, that it's easy to lie upon. Utanan, and again we learned in the Mishnah in Mesechet Shabbos that we brought in the previous Amud, haisa shel or nosan ela mayim achatichla, that if it's made out of hide, you can put water on there until the stain goes away, and therefore again that cannot be the proper interpretation, because in the previous Amud we said everybody agrees if it's soft that there's a problem of kibus. And so the Gemara continues and says, Ela amar Rava, rather Rava says, kol kibus de lesle chiskus lo shmei kibus. If you launder something with water but you don't rub it together one side against the other, that's actually not called laundering. And that's the real interpretation of the Mishnah in Shabbos, is that just water is being applied, but it's not something that actually is called kibus. It's not really called laundering. That's why it was permitted. Rashi explains, Kiskos meshafshef tzido zal. Tzido zal, you take the two sides of the garment, you rub them against one another. Kederach hamechabes begadim. That's what people would do when they wash clothing. Oches habeged b'shtei yadav u'meshafshef. They would hold the garment with two hands and they would rub it together. And that's the actual interpretation of the Mishnah in Shabbos according to Rava. The Gemara continues, V'hodamar Rav Chia bar Ashi. Now that which Rav Chia bar Ashi said, Zimnan Sagin hava koimna kame derav. Many times I was standing in front of Rav, Shachshichi le mesani b'mayi. We brought this on the previous summit as well. Again, he would clean the shoes. That was talking about a situation of ore, of hide, and he would clean it with water. And there it says shichshuch in. So shichshuch apparently was allowed, avol kibus lo, but it was not allowed to be laundered. And the Gemara here is understanding that water was placed upon the leather shoes, but it was not rubbed in the fashion of kibus, as the Gemara has just explained. And how do we interpret that statement? One could say we're talking about shoes that are made of soft leather, and then that would be according to everyone, because there would be a problem of doing actual kibus. Or ibekashin, you could also say it's made out of hard leather, and then you would say that this follows the opinion of the acherim. The acherim would say that by hard leather it would be problematic to do kibus, and that's why again, shichshuchin, but kibus lo. But the Gemara continues and asks, Ihachi, if so, if the interpretation of the Mishnah in Shabbos is if it's kibus, the less like kiskus, that's not called kibus, so then beged nami, that Mishnah in Shabbos was not only talking about or, it was talking about regular, so regular begadim, you should be allowed to launder by just placing them in water, but not rubbing them together. But that's not what the Mishnah in Shabbos said. The Mishnah was only lenient when it came to or, with regards to hide, and the Gemara answers for that, beged, when it comes to a garment that's made out of, let's say, wool or linen, so they're already shriyu, so simply soaking it, zehu kibuso, that is called kibus. So it really does depend on the material. There's some material where shriyaso zehu kibuso, and other material that is not the case. That's how you understand the Mishnah in Mesechet Shabbos. And the Gemara continues and says, Rava l'taime, Rava follows his reasoning, Diyamar Rava, because Rava says, Zorak sudor l'mayim chayiv, if somebody throws a sudor, and that refers to a regular cloth made out of wool, for example, so then the person is chayiv. That is considered to be kibus. Again, the idea of shriyaso zehu kibuso. Zorak pishton l'mayim, if somebody throws flaxseed into water, chayiv, there also the person is liable. And the Gemara says, bishlam masudr, now we understand that by a cloth, as we just said, of a kibus, there it's a problem that he's doing kibus, he's laundering. Elazera pishton, when it comes to a seed of smai time, what's the problem of throwing that into water? V'chitem mishum de miktach, if you're going to say that the explanation is because it sprouts, so it's like planting. But if so, chiti v'sari nami, why would you say it only by flaxseed? That would be true by wheat and barley as well. And so the Gemara instead says, Hanoch islahu riri, when it comes to zera pishtan, there's discharge. Since there is discharge, that creates a problem, as we'll see in a moment. The Gemara says, Yachi, if so, shalachim nami, the same should be true by shlachim as well, which is hide. They also have riri, they also have a certain discharge in the water. And the Gemara answers to that, Hasam over there, when it comes to zera pishtan, pishton ka'avid lisha. What's actually happening is it's now capable of turning into something that is able to be kneaded. It's a problem of lisha, problem of lush. That's the problem of zorak pishton. That's the problem of throwing the flaxseed into water. That does not apply when it comes to the shlachim. And the Gemara continues, Darash Rava Darshan mutter lechabes minol b'Shabbos. It's mutter to wash a shoe on Shabbos. The Gemara continues, Amalei Rav Papa l'Rava. Rav Papa said to Rava, V'amar Rav Chia bar Ashi. But Rav Chia bar Ashi said, Zimnin sagin hava koimna kame derav. Many times I was standing before Rav, v'shach shichi le misani v'maya, and we placed water on the shoes in order to wash them, but shich shochin. But again, it was just the placement of water. Avol kibas lo, but to actually launder them would be a problem. So what do you mean that it's mutter lechabes minol b'Shabbos? And the Gemara then says, Hadar uki Rava amora aleh. Then Rava retracted and he put out a statement from an amora, from a disseminator, as follows: V'darash, and he darshan devarim shamarti lefnechem tos heim biyadi. What I said before you was a mistake. Baram kach amru. Rather they say as follows: Shichshach mutter kibos aser. To place water upon the shoe is mutter, but to do actual laundering, washing, would be a problem. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Hakibus b'makom kadosh. The washing of the garment has to be in a sacred place, meaning in the Azara. The Gemara says, Menahani mili. From where do we know this? To Tanu Rabbanon, because the rabbis taught. To Chabes b'makom kadosh. It says it's washed in a holy place. And Shviras klicheres minayin. From where do we know the breaking of earthenware vessels? That, let's say you cook carbon chatos in there. How do we know that that has to be broken b'makom kadosh? Talmud lomar. The pasuk says, Uchlicheres asher tavush al bo yishaver. It says if you have klicheres that you cook in it, it should be broken. And Mariko shtifa b'chlei nechoshes minayin. The same halacha applies by chlei nechoshes, by copper vessels. You have to do their scouring and rinsing if the chatos is cooked in there. From where do we know that? Talmud lomar. The pasuk says v'im b'chlei nechoshes b'shola umurak v'shutaf b'moyim. Again, if it's cooked in a chlei nechoshes, it has to be scoured and rinsed in water. All of these psukim are written in the same general area. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said zechomer b'chatos, that this is a stringency by chatos over kodshei kodshim. This halacha of washing the garment that gets the blood, it's a stringency by chatos. The Gemara says v'suleka, is this the only stringency? There's no other stringency. Va'ika shenichnas damo lifnim. But what about the halacha of nichnas damo lifnim, of the fact that you have chatos that the blood is brought, the inner chatos where the blood is brought inside of the Beis Hamikdash? That's a stringency by chatos we don't find by other karbanos, even kodshei kodshim. The Gemara says, well, bechatos hachitzonos, you have outer chatos, so there you don't bring the blood inside. So this would be the only kind of stringency by chatos hachitzonos. But the Gemara says, what about shem nichnas damo lifnim psula? There's another halacha by chatos hachitzonos, that if the blood is brought inside, that's a disqualification. That's also a stringency that applies by chatos hachitzonos. And the Gemara says to that, Rabbi Akiva, we're following in this Mishnah Rabbi Akiva, the Yamar, because he says, Kol damim shenichnasu lehechol lechaper psula. All bloods that enter into the Hechol Lechaper, that is a disqualification. But the Gemara says, what about the following? Shekein mechaper al chayve krisos. What about the fact that they are not an atonement on chayve krisos? That's a stringency when it comes to carbon chatos. And the Gemara says, bechatos to shmiyas hakol. There's the chatos of shmiyas hakol. That is the chatos that one brings for falsely taking an oath that he doesn't know testimony in a certain case. Over there, it's not punishable by kares. But the Gemara continues and asks, shekein te'una arba matanos. What about the requirement of 4 matanos, 4 applications of blood? The Gemara says to that, Rabbi Shmuel, we're following Rabbi Shmuel, the Amar, who says, Kol damim tu'un dalid matanos, that all of the bloods require 4 applications. What about al dalid karnos? What about the fact that it's on the 4 corners of the mizbeach, on all 4 corners? But the Gemara says, v'lataymech, according to your reasoning, we can find other stringencies. Ha'ika keren, there's the fact that it's the corner. Ha'ika etzba, there's the fact that it's done with the finger. Ha'ika chuda, there's the fact that it's along the edge. So there clearly are other stringencies. Elachad mitrei tlaso chumrei nakat. Rather, the Mishnah is just choosing one of 2 or 3 stringencies that could have been chosen. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Beged sheyotza chutz leklayim. Let's say a garment, it leaves the klayim, it leaves the curtains of the Azara. Rashi explains, Beged shenitas olav dam chatas. We're talking here about a garment where the blood of the chatas got in the garment. Now there's an obligation really to wash that garment in the Azara. But v'yotza chutz leklayim, but then it leaves the area of the Azara. So then what do we do? Nichnas, you have to bring it back in, umechavso b'makom kadosh, and it's washed in a holy place. And Rashi says, Nichnas li Azara, it's brought back into the Azara, Mechavso b'makom kadosh, and it's washed within the Azara, in the sacred place of the Azara. And the Mishnah continues, Nitma chutz lekloim. Now let's say it became tamei outside of the curtains. Let's say it became tamei outside of the Azara. Rashi explains, Nitma chutz lekloim la'achar sheyotza, meaning after it left, it then became tamei. V'yefshar lahachnes tumah la'azara. You're not allowed to bring tumah into the Azara. So how are you going to do the washing if you can't bring it back into the Azara? And so for that, the Mishnah says, Koro, what you do is, the person tears it. Rashi explains, Koro vitar, he tears it in a way that makes it pure. Vitar mitum, it's no longer tameyu mutter lahachniso, it's now mutter to bring it back in, to enter it. V'nichnas u'mechavso b'makom kadosh, he can bring it in, and he can wash it in the holy place. As the Mishnah continues, after he tears it, nichnas u'mechavso b'makom kadosh, he brings it in and he washes it in the holy place. And the Mishnah continues, kli cheres sheyotza chutz lekloim, let's say you have an earthenware vessel that goes outside of the curtains of the Azara, nichnas v'shovro b'makom kadosh, you bring it back in to break it in the holy place. And nitma chutz lekloim, let's say it becomes tamei outside of the curtains. Again, the same problem, you can't bring tumah into the Azara, so nokvo makes a hole in it, v'nichnas, and then he brings it in, v'shovro b'makom kadosh, and breaks it in the holy place. Klinachosha sheyotza chutz lekloim, copper vessels that go outside of the curtains, nichnas umarko v'shotzvo b'makom kadosh, he brings it in and scours and rinses it in the holy place. And again, nitma chutz lekloim, if it becomes tamei outside of the curtains, pochso v'nichnas umarko v'shotzvo b'makom kadosh, so then he damages it and he brings it in and he scours and rinses it in the holy place. Rashi explains, pochso means dechlei matzchos eino tar b'nekev koldu. The point over there is that when it comes to metal vessels, a small hole is not going to be enough to purify. Ela b'nekev gadol, it has to be a large hole. That's what it means, pochso. And the Gemara says, Maskif lo Ravina. Ravina asks the following question. Koro, the Mishnah says that the solution is to tear it if it becomes tamei, but beged amar Achmana, the pasuk says it has to be a beged. V'lav beged, who once you tear it, it's not a beged anymore, so how is that a solution? Rashi explains, beged amar Achmana sheyeh shem beged olav b'shas kibus, so it should be called a beged at the time that the person is washing it. And the Gemara continues and says, the Mishayer Bey Kadei Mapores. Rashi explains, the Mishayer Bey Shalo Yavdel Asaker al Pnei Kulo. He doesn't tear the entire garment. Lachlok es habeged l'shnayim, that he cuts the garment, he splits it in two. El Mishayer Bo Kadei Rochev Sudar. Rather, he leaves there the amount of the width of a cloth. To mitumaso tar, when he tears it in that fashion, it is now pure, it's not tamei. Whole of a nikra rubo, since the majority was torn. V'chayvan Shashayer Bo Kadei Mapores. But since he leaves off the amount of a small cloth that he does not tear, royal lechabro, so it's fit to attach, ushmo olav, and its name is tilapanit, uveged karinan bey, and it is referred to as a beged. And the Gemara continues, Ini, is that really the case? V'amar Rav Huna, but Rav Huna says, Lo shanu, we only learn this halacha, ela shelo shayer bo kadei maporos, only in a situation where he did not leave the amount of a small cloth. Avol shayer bo kadei maporos chibur have, but if he did leave that amount, then it's considered to be an attachment. Rashi explains, V'amar Rav Huna, but Rav Huna said, Beperek ha'or v'harotiv, in Perek ha'or v'harotiv, this is in Meseches Chulin, Lo shanu de talis tameya, we only learn that a talis which is tamei, she'ischol bo lekora, which he began to tear, that kevon shenikra ruba tahora, that since he tore the majority it's pure, that halacha is only true. Ela shelo shayer bo samiyat kadei maporos, it's only if he did not leave the amount of a small cloth. Aval shayer bo kadei maporos, but if he left that amount untorn, so chibur hav, it's considered to be attached. Vadayin hu betumaso, and it actually is still tamei, and so therefore that would not seem to be a solution if he's meshayer bei kadei maporos. So then it actually would still be tamei. That would not actually purify it. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph.